Good afternoon, everybody. As always, welcome to the Unqork Twitch channel with the Uncoder. Today's talk, no guest today, just me here. Today's talk, though, is one that I have been very excited about doing for quite some time. And we just had a few new enhancements that I'm also going to show that came into Unqork on Tuesday night's staging environment release. So now it's available for everyone in their development environments. And this was something that we were really waiting for just to make this that much better and that much more exciting and that much more complete of a build for you. And also, I want to take this opportunity to talk about that new feature and the great work our platform team did to produce it. And this subject is going to be APIs, right? Now, we've talked about APIs. We've talked about how you can build an API module in Unqork. But we're going to go a level higher with this one. And we're going to talk about concepts like API gateways and really structuring your requests and your responses and doing a lot of other things you want to do with your APIs to help them be usable, shareable, and scale. Okay, now the background behind me here is a very basic API, not an IPA, an API. So we're talking about APIs today. Maybe one day I'll do a late night Twitch and we'll talk more about IPAs. I am a bit of a hophead, although more into Pilsners these days. But either way, I digress. APIs is the subject today. And again, we're going to focus on high-level API stuff. To give you some more information about this, some of you might have read some of the information that we are going to talk about today. Earlier on, we published a blog post up on Unqork's website talking about modernizing and scaling your APIs through an API gateway. So you can go over there. The link should be up in the chat so you can go and learn more about the subjects we're talking about today. But before I even start sharing and get building, since the focus is going to be around an API gateway, let's just talk a little bit about API gateways, right? So you might have heard of the concept before. You might have heard of platforms like Apigee, which is probably the market leader in terms of dedicated API product. Apigee was acquired by Google some years ago. But what it effectively does is it acts as a gateway that sits on top of your API, right? And you can add functionality into that layer, that gateway layer, without necessarily touching your underlying APIs. Right now, there's a number of reasons why organizations want to add in API gateways on top of their APIs. One might be modernization, right? You might have a lot of old legacy APIs that potentially they are XML based and nobody likes to use XML anymore these days. You don't necessarily need to have your engineering team go build a JSON interface to an XML API. You can apply those transformations in a gateway, right? You might also have internal APIs that you want to expose to the outside world. And when doing so, you need to authenticate those APIs. That's something that also requires a fair amount of engineering work. If you use an API gateway, you can provide that level of authentication on top of your APIs, again, without touching your APIs themselves, right? So it's a way to add a ton of functionality in and actually even create a single front door to a number of different APIs that you have. You might have a ton of different applications that are all building APIs, tons of microservices within your infrastructure, but you want a single gateway to get into them. You don't want every single service to have to worry about the authentication themselves. You might not even want those services or the end users even to have to worry about which API to call when, right? Give them a single interface. You handle making the appropriate calls to all the different APIs you have sitting in your system. As APIs took over in popularity and really enabled a ton of interactivity and connectivity between systems, a whole economy grew around APIs called the API economy, right? Where people could start to monetize even their APIs and the access to the data that their API controls. When you're doing something like this, you've probably gone on to various different applications, websites, and in order to get an API, you subscribe to a key, and maybe you have a base level of a key, which gets you access to some APIs. Maybe you can pay a little bit more for a premium version access. So creating those tiers of who gets access to what are also things that these gateways kind of provide for you. As I was saying that, I was reminded of another big thing in regards to security, also concepts like rate limiting and throttling. right? You might not want to be able, you're not going to want your end users to make millions and millions of requests to your API in a very short amount of time. That can be very problematic for your servers to maybe handle that type of load. And it oftentimes is either going to be a result of maybe a bug in somebody's client-side code that's interfacing with your API, or even just a malicious attack, denial of service type attack. Build those rate limiting into the API, so in the API gateway, so your API doesn't even see that traffic. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons about why you might want to consider an API gateway when you're building software. Now, we have examples where people will use a dedicated API gateway product like an Apigee and sit that on top of Unqork. Build those API modules in Unqork, place an API gateway along the top to control access even to Unqork. So that's not uncommon, particularly with the types of industries that Unqork is building software for: financial services, insurance industries, which have very tight security requirements. So you can always layer in an API gateway on top of Unqork, particularly if you're in an organization that are already using an API gateway. The APIs you build in Unqork will fall right in line with the rest of your gateway. Okay, but that isn't to say, since Unqork is such a great development platform, that's not to say that Unqork cannot provide and does not provide a number of common API gateway features out of the box. Now, when I say out of the box, I mean kind of two things. I mean, one is dedicated features exposed within Designer that align with API gateway functionality. And I'll show what some of those are. But going a step further, when I say out of the box too, I'm always thinking about the fact that Unqork's a development platform, right? So even if there isn't a checkbox inside of Designer that allows you to do a certain thing, it doesn't mean that thing doesn't exist. You have all the tools available at your disposal to build the types of features that you might need in an API gateway or anything else. So some of what we're going to talk about today are just features where you're going to go check a box or choose from a dropdown inside of Unqork. Some of them are going to be some configuration that you can create to maintain some of these capabilities. All right. So with that said, let's jump in and let's actually build an API gateway and some APIs that work within the gateway. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Get that demo going. Am I sharing? There we go. The screen is up and let's rock and roll. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do though, before I even get into the gateway stuff, I'm just going to build an API module, right? Do a quick refresher on building an API module, all right? We're going to call this one the full name API, and we're going to give it an API tag. And I like module paths that look like that, very readable. So I'm going to add that, okay? I'm going to inside my API module. And as always, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my API specification, okay? I'm going to come into my method. And I'm going to say, calculate someone's full name based on the other names. Other names, first name, middle name, last name, right? We're going to make this one a put right now because that's the primary method that you execute most of your APIs in Unqork. And we'll come in here and we'll call the first one first name, and that's going to be a string. And it's going to be required. And I'm going to go into notes, and then I'm going to say first name, nice and easy. I'll ignore my typos. I feel like I always want to fix my typos, but you're not really here for a typing lesson. You're here for a no-code lesson, if you will. So let's call this one last name. I'm not going to let greater than sign slide by, though. All right, first name, last name. Okay. And then all I'm going to do here is I'm going to calc that. So I'm going to kill all of this stuff here. And I'm just going to drop in a calculator. And very simply, I'm going to take in the first name, take in the last name, call it F, call it L, required there. And I'm going to call full name is equal to concatenate F with a space. Okay. And we'll save that. Come down here. This is our full name. It's also going to be a string. So get rid of the rest of these. Full name. Store data in database saying it's going to be sent back. And it's the full name. All right. Save. And I will save it. Okay. So now I'll jump over. I'm going to go over to the API docs. Just make sure I have everything documented properly and structured properly within my module, because if I don't do that, everything I'm about to talk about is not going to work, right? Because we want to follow good practices. We want to build around good practices, create capabilities that leverage best practices and good practices. So some of the API stuff I'm going to show you, or all the API stuff I'm going to show you for that matter, does not work if you're not building things in the right way. And we always want people to build things in the right way. So I come in here and there it is, right? The full name calculates someone's full name, first name, last name, full name. Okay. Now, for testing today, for testing my APIs today, I'm going to go into Postman and I will add a new request. I'll call it full name. Give me a put, right? That's my endpoint. I've got my little variable here, which says call my environment, execute. I'm going to go into my body and I'm going to pass a JSON body that's going to be data. And then we've got first name is Nick. Last name is Campbell. What? I'm going to use a better example. Ruth Ginsburg. Calculate it. And I got nothing back. What did I do wrong? Told you we're going to do this fun today. We're going to do this on the fly. Calc trigger, go. First name, last name, calc, manual. First name, last name, full name, calc, concatenate. First name, last name, and I should have got full name back. I didn't get full name back. All right, let's do some debugging. So first thing, I noticed that I don't get this little icon here. It tells me preview, which means I didn't do one thing, which is I didn't say server-side execute only. Because that's an important part of having an API, is making sure it's server-side. And you might have noticed when Unqork updated, one of the more recent updates is this beautiful header up here on our modules, where you're going to get breadcrumbs back to the workspace application and module you're on, as well as this button to preview. It used to always say preview, and it used to be a second button for server-side. Didn't make sense when you had a front-end module and you wouldn't server-side execute that, or have an API module and you wouldn't, preview that in a browser. So now you're only going to see one. It'll give you the other one as an option, but here's the main one. So I'm going to come in and let's try this again. I'll say first name, Ruth. Last name is Ginsburg. Let's execute it. Oh, I got Ruth Ginsburg there. So why didn't I get Ruth Ginsburg there? Put host FBI, FBU, UAPI modules, body. Oh, because I have date. All right. Cool. Boom. Also, I noticed no comments here. If we got very insightful, if we got Hawkeye people watching this, tell me where I screwed up. I'd love to hear from y'all when I screw up. There it is, data. Okay, cool. So now I've got Ruth Ginsburg as my full name. Cool, so that's building an API, pretty straightforward, right? But what are maybe some not wonderful things about this, right? What could we improve upon building an APIs, okay? That's where an API gateway is going to come in, and that's where we're going to get to see some enhancements. So things that have always kind of irked me, right, is, well, I have this crazy big module ID. I don't know what it is, right? If I'm using this in an external client and I'm not doing it directly within a plugin in Unqork, this doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Without having an interface into Unqork and seeing all the modules and being able to look this up, this itself doesn't really mean much to me. Similarly, maybe I don't like this structure of data. Maybe I don't want to have to put an object called data inside of my request body in order to get things to work. Maybe I don't like data.resolve.something being my response on the output, right? This could be a matter of preference where you want to keep smaller payloads and reduce unnecessary values like such as these, which might be exposing information you don't want to expose. Or often you're going to be interfacing with other systems that demand a certain response from you, right? I'm going to go back to actually later to wrap this Twitch up. I'm going to go back to that Slack app that we talked about a couple months ago. And I'm going to show how that's been improved because we don't have to deal with this kind of a response any longer, right? Thanks to some great new features of the platform. So those, and then also it's a put. Now, maybe in this case, it makes sense to be a put because you're doing some calculations, but you sometimes want to you want to post, you want to delete. Those have been available in Unqork for quite some time, but maybe folks aren't fully aware about how you can leverage all the different request verbs, all the different types of request bodies that you can send or query strings you can send, and now how you can even shape the response of your API. Okay, so those are some of the things that we're going to add on top of the API. I'm going to go a little bit further, and that's all going to be in the context of using an API gateway, again, to create this layer on top of your existing APIs. Like, let's say I didn't just build this right now, I've had this API for a while. Build an existing layer on top of your APIs, add some functionality. Before I dive into some of the configuration-based features that I want to show about this API gateway, let's just talk about some of the more designer-focused features that kind of relate to being an API gateway. First and foremost, I talked about rate limiting. Okay, so that is effectively the number of requests that a given endpoint can make to your system at any given point in time. Okay, and that is a feature available directly within Unqork's designer's environmental admin or environment admin called API rate limiting, right? This will limit the number of requests that can come from any one IP per server per 60 seconds. So right now, this environment allows any given IPA. Last time I got the IPs, I got the APIs. Together, they're the IPAs. All right, I'm dreaming of the beer later tonight. So this is 1,000, right? So 1,000 requests are going to be allowed per IP per second. You can go as low as 100, which is going to give you a little over a request a second, which shouldn't be very damaging to any server, right? Now, of course, I guess it depends on what you're doing in that request, but generally speaking, you're not going to be doing anything too crazy available via API that you should be able to deal with that kind of volume. And then I guess the maximum here is a whopping million. I don't recommend ever updating this to be 1 million. I think 1,000 could even be argued to be a little high depending on your use case, but you never know your use case. So 1,000 is a safe default to put in that Unqork is going to be able to handle that with no problem. And the things that you build in Unqork will be able to handle that with no problem. But it's not going to be so large that it would cause any, again, denial of server, DOS problems if that happened. But when you're choosing it, think about how folks are going to be calling. What is a reasonable number of calls that could be made per minute, and set it to that, because anything over that reasonable shouldn't be allowed. Okay. Second feature that's related to API security and focus on API gateway is, of course, the permissions. The RBAC, role-based access control, setting who can access what. So when building APIs, ensure that you're setting the right permissions for the right roles in the environment to execute the API. And this is even something that could be used to build customized dashboards, right? So I've always thought about a future state of this API docs dashboard where it's role dependent, So if you go view this with a user of a specific role, it should only give you, the APIs available to you. And it very well might work that way to begin with. To be totally honest, I'm often logged in as an administrator, so I get kind of that full-blown access. But you can limit down the set of APIs that you show people based on roles. So, I went back to that whole API economy concept about how different people could pay for different access to a different set of APIs within your organization, or even with different APIs, right? Maybe you have an e-commerce API. You want to give some people access to the products API. You want to give some people access to the checkout API. Those might be two different tiers, and you might give different roles access to it, or so maybe I set a silver tier or a silver role in Unqork, right? So I come into Unqork, I go into my role, I set up a role called silver, and that's my silver tier, and that gives me access to my product catalog API. And then I can create a gold tier where I give any user with the gold role access to my product catalog and my checkout API, because gold partners can actually build interfaces where they can, actually do the payments versus kicking it over to me, maybe with some kind of affiliate link. So you can even build, again, these tiered things if you're in a world where you're going to expose your APIs outside of Unqork. right? Now, of course, in many cases, at least with our clients, you're building a lot of tools that you're not going to expose. You don't want everybody to maybe mess with your insurance policies and things like that. But you can envision a ton of scenarios of things that you can build in Unqork that you might want to tier access to. Okay. We've showed service logs before many times, but that very rich debugging information that you're going to get about your module execution. So when I pull up my service logs, I should see pretty close to the top, because I think I'm the only one messing around right now. Yep, I see those requests. These are the ones that came from Postman. The first one not having any data because I messed up, because this is how I could have found it out too, right? I could have went in here and I could have said, date, there's my problem. And then again, I see the one that worked right after that, right? So you have the rich logging that you would want to get with any kind of an API gateway, and then as well as monitoring. All right, so actually going in and looking at the performance of your APIs over time, which you can get some of directly within service logs, but look to the monitoring tools in Unqork to get a much bigger picture, more volume, more aggregation capabilities, and it's also something that runs external to your environment to monitor it. And I just want to actually, since I said that, just want to go back to that, right? Monitoring. It's a topic that's actually coming up a lot within Unqork today, as our customers are taking on more and more of the development themselves, and they're really interested in the capabilities that Unqork has around monitoring. And it's really key, though, when you think about monitoring, is ensure that your monitoring server, your monitoring application is not your production server, right? I know some people want to, maybe build applications in production because it has access to all the data it needs in theory, right? But that's not where you want to build your monitors, right? So let's take service logs, for example. This is something that can live on your production server if you want to do the type of log by log debugging of any given request. Somebody reports a problem to me. I want to come in and I want to look at exactly what happened to figure out what it is. But this is not something you'd want to do in a monitoring capacity, right? You wouldn't want to actually look at these response codes and these durations in service logs to do any monitoring, because they live on the server that you are monitoring to make sure it's healthy, right? So that's where the other tools that Unqork provides, the UDLC monitoring tools, come in to actually look at the health of your system and be alerted when things are going wrong, because those tools live in a separate environment. So they're not impacted when the environment that you care about is impacted, right? So just a high level thing, make sure to keep monitoring separate from the server that you're monitoring. That being said, let's jump back into API gateways. There's one other thing here that is not exposed directly within Designer, but something I do want to talk about with Unqork is a web application firewall, right? So I think we've all heard the term firewall before. We've probably seen movies back in the 80s or 90s where you got those hackers breaking through the firewall. I'm sure it still happens in some movies today. But that's effectively a virtual wall that sits in front of your servers and will block any traffic that goes into it, okay? So if you needed to say, hey, I don't want anybody except for this other server in my own ecosystem to access this environment, let's say it's an Unqork environment, you can set up a web application firewall and only allow a single IP access into those servers, right? And that's the best way to go about it, because that firewall is going to block it. Your server's not going to get any of the traffic. That's what's called allow lists or whitelists, right? Where you where you define what you want to allow in. That is the safest way to do it, because if you go the other way, which is a deny list or a blacklist, that means you have to add every single IP address that you want to block, one by one by one by one. So what's going to happen is someone's going to, do something nefarious from one IP. They're going to see they get blocked. They're going to change their IP and they're going to come at you again. And you're just going to constantly be chasing your own tail in that regard to block every single place. I mean, I think I've used this example a few times in my life where you might remember the movie Ice Age, where that little, I don't know what kind of animal it was. If anyone knows the kind of animal, shoot it in the chat, please. That keep, filling the holes with his finger as he's on the sheet of ice and the water's spinning out and he's, clogging the holes with his finger. But every time he clogs one hole, another hole pops up and he has to go clog that and then go that. And then next thing you know, he clogs with his mouth and then he blows up and flies away, right? That's kind of the idea here. If you're constantly trying to plug the holes, new holes are always going to come through. versus just allowing one hole all the time from the one place that you trust. Okay, so doing that at the application firewall is always going to be your best bet, but I am going to show you some ways that you can do it very simply inside of configuration if you did want to do it on maybe a per API basis within your environment. Maybe you have multiple APIs living inside of Unqork. Different IPs should have access to only specific APIs, so you can't block it necessarily at the firewall, because once they're in, they theoretically have access to everything. Here would be a more specific, more granular way that you can control access to specific APIs or suites of APIs. Okay. Whew. Tiring myself out. I can use a sip of an IPA right now before I keep going. So we said that, great, we've got a very standard Unqork API built here, but we're gonna jazz it up a little bit. And the way that we're gonna start doing that is with a flavor of API development that's called execute as a proxy. Sometimes we'll also call it the API layer, because it is a layer, right? And that's what a proxy is too. It's a layer, right? And down here, you'll see in the API documentation of Unqork, the lowest level API documentation of Unqork, those platform APIs, you'll see there are 5 options here on top of the execute, right? So the execute is the one that you probably know. If you're an Unqork user, you know and you've loved and you've used for years and years and years, right? Well, if you didn't know, or if you're brand new to all of this, you have 5 other options available to you. And you'll see that each comes with a specific verb, all right? Now, these verbs are HTTP verbs that are meant to describe, and this is if you're building RESTful APIs, and a lot of folks might have switched over to GraphQL, and Unqork continues to have more and more built with GraphQL. So I'll probably be up here before long talking to you about GraphQL development, and I've got a couple folks in mind in the company who can help join me talk about that. But we're going to focus on RESTful APIs here. So when you're building a RESTful API, these methods are typically very, very important, right? So a get method does what it says, right? It's typically when you're building an API that is just going to get information. Okay, I'm going to query against a database. I'm going to pull back certain records, just very much a get. So it should not manipulate any data in the system. Okay, so this is that get API. And when you're doing a get API, you'll see the path in the query string flexible. So the query with the query string is, what I come up here and I put stuff like that. That's the query string. When using a get, it's the query string. So whenever you're navigating in your browser, you're typically, unless you're pushing a button, you're using get requests all the time. Every time I open a new page in my browser, it's a get request, get request, get request. Unless I push some kind of button, then it's going to maybe do one of the other ones. Okay? Within that get request, so think about when I go to Google. I'll go to Google and I will search for Unqork, right? You'll see they put Q equals Unqork. That's a get request where the query parameter is Unqork. Okay? So there's your get. You've got posts. So posts are mostly analogous to creating of data. So I'm thinking more in terms of like a CRUD application that's going to create, read, update, and delete data. So a post is typically going to be associated with your creation of data. It also tends to be a bucket for other things that are, really important that maybe also have a lot of sensitive data being passed through in the request. Will be going into a post. Okay, so if you're creating data or some of the data in that request is very sensitive in nature, think about not using a get. So like an example of that could be, let's say I need to look up somebody by their email address. Okay, you might think that a get is the best way to go because I'm getting something on an email. But emails are sensitive information. People, that's someone's effectively their mailing address in many ways today. That might not be information that you want to expose to end users. When you put things in the get, all of the information that you put in this query string at the top, this gets sent along with the request, and oftentimes gets logged, right? Because it's part of the URL. Now, some systems might disable logging of query strings for these reasons, but not all do. So when you're putting the sensitive information in your requests, it's probably best to avoid get so that information doesn't appear in your logs. Put it into post because most logging systems are going to throw this away, with the exception of Unqork, which is going to keep it in your service logs, which are dedicated to your environment and very, very secure. Okay, so posts are create, sensitive, wild operations. Updates are put is updating data. Okay, so let's say I've created a new employee record and then they decided that they're going to, and they changed their salary, they just got a raise. So I need to update their salary in my HR system. That's likely going to be a put request saying, hey, for employee 123, change their salary to X. Right? So that's usually, again, an update, analogous to an update. Deletes are actually, you know what? I'm going to do patch next, not only because it's in line, but because this is helpful in the types of updates you're going to do. And patch wasn't always super popular, but it's gained a lot more popularity, at least I've seen over the last few years, to be a more specific type of a put. Okay, so sometimes a system will tell you that when you're doing a put to update data, it's a complete replacement of the data. Okay, so if I'm going to update somebody's salary and I want to keep their name the same, if I'm just to update my salary field, I still need to send the complete information, all the other information like first name, last name, and salary, even if salary is only changed, because I'm just saying, hey, this is the new representation of this entity. This is all the new information about this customer or this employee in my example. Right? So a put is meant to be a wholesale change, but definitely read the API docs of whatever API you're talking to understand whether or not that's the case. Patch, on the other hand, is a partial update, right? So in this case, if I wanted to update the salary, I wouldn't also have to send first name, last name to make sure first name, last name don't change. I would just send the salary to make sure, and then only the salary changes, and I don't do anything to any of the fields that didn't come through the request. So there are two different flavors of updates, implemented differently by the different APIs that you're going to use. So again, keep an eye out for that. And then Unqork's plugins support all of these methods when making the requests. And then delete, you should have no surprise there. Delete something, right? So if I'm going to delete a record, a good practice would be to put the verb of delete there. All right, so that's an overview of the request verb supported and the execute proxy that allows them. Okay, so what can we do with this? Why would we want to use this, and what are some of the benefits of it? All right, in order to do that, I'm going to show the API gateway. Okay, so this is a module in Unqork that effectively functions as an API gateway. Right, and it's going to give us some nice enhancements to the default APIs, potentially without even touching anything that you've already built inside of Unqork. All right, I'm going to show what I mean by that. Okay, so what are some of the things we're going to cover in terms of a configuration-based API gateway functionality? I don't know if I quoted configuration. It's 100% configuration. You can see the configuration. So RESTful module path-based endpoints. What on earth do I mean by that? First off, RESTful. Okay, so that is what I was saying before with get, post, put, patch, delete. Those are the RESTful, verbs when making API calls. So whereas right now, and for a while, there was always a put, no matter what you did, it was a put, taking advantage of these get, put, post, deletes, again, without even necessarily having to change any existing APIs that you've built. Okay. Then we've got API versioning. Okay. Well, you know what? Let's go one by one here. All right. Let me go one by one. So let's start with RESTful module path-based endpoints. Okay. So here is a module. And again, I have my path over here called full name. Right. But when I'm executing this API, I don't get to use that full name, even if it's descriptive of what the API is doing. All that could change. Right. So now, what this API gateway module is going to do is it's going to support using the module path to make a lot more clarity to the endpoints. And it's also going to allow me to do it in a true RESTful manner. Okay. So in this case, again, I have my module path is full name, and I have my method currently is put. Okay. So now I'm going to jump over, and I am going to go to this API gateway put. And I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to type in full name. And I'm going to try like this. Bad request too much. Oh, yeah. I've got to put in a body. And I'm going to put in my body again. And this time, I'm just going to put in first name, last name. Is it Berg or Berg? Well, we'll go with that one. Oh, man. All right, I'm going to go V1. I think I have to show you multiple features at the same time. Okay? So I was trying to go one by one without making any changes, but I'm going to make a little bit of a change. And what did I change there? What I did was I changed the module path. Now, again, this wouldn't impact any functionality of your existing module because most module executions already are only via the module ID. So I'm going to add a little V1 at the end here. Okay? And now I'm going to go back. And it's still going to give me problems here. Put API full name, bad request to module. Let me, just for fun, try it the old school way. Nope. What is Nick doing wrong here? All right, I'm going to do something that I probably should have done is when you get a marketplace snippet, see, live debugging, I thought this might happen. You're going to get this description panel. I usually like to remove it. In this case, I didn't remove it. And maybe that's what's hosing me here. Okay. So I'm going to come back and yep, that's what was hosing me was that marketplace documentation panel. So I got rid of it. Okay. So I ended up having to do a few things at once here. So let me just talk through all of them. So what looks different about this? First and foremost, I still got a put. I didn't change anything there. I still got a module ID, but it's no longer the module ID of the module I'm executing. And then after it, I have API, right? So API, if I go back here, you'll see for all of these API, it all ends with API. So that's, instead of putting that /execute at the end, put the /API at the end, right? So I've got /API. Now I've got this thing called V1, okay? V1, you might have seen these in a lot of APIs before. You'll see them in Unqork. If I go up top here, you'll see this API 1.0. It's a similar concept. It's API versioning, okay? And it's basically saying that when you make a request to this version, it's always going to utilize that version of the API so that you can do, basic, effectively non-backwards compatible changes to your API without breaking things that people are already doing. This is really, really important as you're building highly consumed APIs. You're gonna need to make changes. You're gonna wanna add functionality. You're gonna wanna add new required request attributes, as we're gonna do in a second. You might wanna change the response. Like, your APIs are going to evolve over time, but as your APIs grow, more and more people are going to be utilizing those APIs, which makes it harder and harder to make changes to those APIs if you're not versioning them. Okay, so that's why even at the lowest level of an Unqork API, the platform ones, it has that 1.0. So we want to recreate that concept inside of configuration to give you the ability to change APIs without potentially breaking any existing integrations you have. Okay, so now I've got, this is that starting point, which is then effectively what every API that you're going to run is going to hit. All right, so this is effectively just, so I could even come in, and I could take this whole thing, I can update my Postman host variable to include everything up here, and then all I'm going to see is V1 full name. So then you have like a very clean look of your APIs, and then everything you're maybe configuring inside of Postman, or even let's think about if you had one Unqork environment talking to another Unqork environment, when you set up that service and service administration, your host URL could in theory be this entire thing. And then all you're configuring in your plugins are stuff like V1 full name, V2 full name, whatever it may be, right? So you're able to kind of really just focus the API that you're calling on just the version and a nice friendly name for that API. All right, so V1 full name. So when I execute it, boom, it works. Now, you'll see also, I didn't have that data in there anymore, right? The data's gone, nor did I have data.resolve.full name. I just have a very clean JSON body of first name, last name, and a very clean JSON body of full name. Okay, so with this part of it, comes from the execute as a proxy feature, which allows me, when sending modules, to effectively parse out the entire request body, okay? And let me just show you that. Oops. So over in this API module, you'll see right at the top, I have something called a calc request. So when you get requests through your API layer, through this request as proxy or execute as proxy, all the data that you're going to care about to know about the request is going to come through this special property called _request. Once you're in there, there's a lot of information you can extract out. I can extract out the method, all right? So that's going back to that HTTP method, get, put, post, delete, patch, right? It's going to tell me the path. So what the path is going to be, terrible at command tabbing. It's not just on this Twitch. Every day of my life, I can't command tab. That's basically going to be this, right? Everything that's in the path. So it's going to tell me what's in the path so I can do things based on that, okay? It's also going to give me the query. So if I'm doing a GET request, this is going to give me the query string, okay? It's going to give me the body. If I'm doing a post or a put or a patch, it's going to give me the body. And then it's going to give me the headers regardless of the method that I've chosen. And if I happen to be uploading files, it's going to include my file, right? So it's everything that you need to know about the request to kind of to satisfy the request, but add the capabilities we're going to be talking about, that we've been talking about today, right? So that's the first thing it's going to do. It's going to parse out just the important things. I want the header, I want the query, I want the body, and the files. Okay, I'm going to jump down for a second, and I'm going to come down here first. Well, first, actually, no, let me go further. Format the path, right? So what is this doing? This is basically saying, because remember, I was able to get everything here, F1 full name or V1 full name. I get that information. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to format it. And I'm basically going to come in, I'm going to do some work to say, is there a V1? So a regular expression, say, is this a V1? If not, then I'm just going to default to, like V0, but I'm going to say, I'm going to parse out my version. What is my version number? And what is my module, okay? So this is grabbing me my module path and my version and my module. So now I'm going to know what the path to the module is, and I'm going to know what the version of the module is, okay? So jumping back over here, V1. So I named this V1. So basically, what it's saying is, if you have V1 full name, it's going to execute a module that has the path that has the module path of full name V1. Okay, so as you'll see later, if I go like this and build a new one, I can name it V2, and my path looks the same except V2. I can make a non-backwards compatible change. Okay, so that's the first thing it's going to do, is just figure out what are we calling. Then it's actually going to do some data sanitization. It's going to do some data checking, right? And it's going to take the module, and it's going to take that module, and it's going to parse out its documentation. That's why it's important that we follow best practices. And it's why when I had that marketplace wrapper around it, it didn't do the trick, because it wasn't able to extract out what I have defined as the required request for this module, in that it's first name and last name. Okay, so it's going to go and it's going to pull the information about the module, and it's going to get some information about it. It's going to say, well, what's the module ID? Because ultimately, that's what's still required to execute this under the covers. It's going to get me the method. So what HTTP method am I using? Get, put, post, delete, patch. The request body and the response body. Okay. Then it's actually just going to go make the request. So if I come down into here, since this is an old module, right? I mean, I built this in the standard approach, so it expects data. So all I say here is data, and then I pass in what I parsed out as a module request, which was this, right? So even though in the gateway call to this API, I'm passing out first name, last name, the underlying module is still going to get it as data.first name, data.last name, because that's what the module expects when executing through an execute. So I could still have this module running internally in my own system, just doing executes back and forth. But when I expose it to an external system, I can put this gateway on top, allow them to make these calls and not worry about the transformation down to data. Okay. So it's going to do that. The other thing it's going to do along the way there is it's going to sanitize that request. Again, it's going to pull out any module information that isn't, it's going to pull out any request values that aren't defined here. Okay, so it's only going to get first name, it's only going to get last name. So it's going to execute the response, and then it's going to take the data.resolve. So that whole standard format, that data.resolve, it's going to take that whole thing and it's going to dump it into the module response. Okay, which is how we're going to end up getting this. All right, cool. So I've layered in this F1 V1 full name. I've layered in the V1. So I have a versioned full name that calls the full name API. It's going to allow me to just pass in full name, last name. But I want to show you, because, man, I'm at 47 minutes already here. I want to show you how I got this, because this is what just went live in Unqork staging environment on Tuesday night. And this is a new setting. And there's actually going to be a couple settings I'll show all together. A new setting called sse.http response body. Okay. So when I come down here, I'm going to look at these error codes. All right. And there's two things I'm doing here. Well, actually, let me show you the calc first. All right. What I'm doing is I'm going to say, so if I had said, module response, like when I did this thing over here, when I took the execution, if I had mapped out data.resolved into module response, and then I did what folks normally would do, which is then have this module response checked as store data in database, my response that I got back would look like an object with a property called module response, and then the actual data, right? But again, I'm only getting back just the actual object, right? It doesn't say module response in front of it. Just to demonstrate it up here, normally you'd expect it to look something like this. But I'm only getting this, right? So that's using sse.http response body. It works in a calculator, works in a decision. Normally I like using a decision here, but I got a calc going. So sse.response body is equal to the module response. So it's going to take whatever is inside of it, and it's going to send that as the entire response. So now I just get the full name. I don't get data.resolve.full name. I don't get validation errors. I don't get metadata, all the other cruff that comes in the response. I just get this. Now, what happens if I mess something up with my request? So talking about the API gateway, I can make problems here, right? So you were seeing before, I was getting these, module not found, bad module request, things like that. I was getting an error in Postman, and then I had to go delete the marketplace documentation, right? So what's happened in this one? So this was my bad request to module. And here I basically say, when there's a problem, so this is a Rule 500. So this is happening basically when I think it's when somewhere, I wish I knew exactly where, deinit get module. Let's go data workflow get module, right? Oh, wait, what am I doing? I can just go look over here. Where is Rule 500 being called from? Being called from rule execute module. Okay, so what is rule execute module doing? Rule execute module is making sure that I'm using the appropriate method for my request, right? I don't want to put a get. I don't want to get a post. I want to get a get, put, post a post, delete a delete, right? So that's what this is checking. All right, it's making sure that when I follow the API spec and I put in a value for my method, it's making sure that the person is using that method, right? So in this case, it was put and it was put. So that's why if I jump back over here and I switch this to get, I get bad module request, okay? Because this rule did not satisfy, therefore it triggered Rule 500. I go down to Rule 500, and what does that do? It does two things for me. One is it sets the status code to 500. This is something that's been around for a few months on Unqork. Don't know how many folks know it, but you can control very specific error codes with your APIs. Very, very important for error handling, for monitoring, right? If you're always replying at 200 with an error code embedded in the body, your monitoring tools aren't going to catch that. It's going to think it was a success, right? Your error triggers within plugins, your error triggers aren't going to fire because it's going to think it was a success and it's still going to go to your post trigger. Okay, so when you are building API modules, it's super important, and this configuration comes with the marketplace snippet for it. Super important to set error codes on bad requests so that, again, your monitors catch it and your plugins can appropriately follow the post or the error trigger route depending on the success or failure of the API that the plugin is calling. Okay, the second thing it did is it actually overwrote the body of the response, where it says bad request to module. Okay, so rather than saying, oh, it's a 500, but still giving me data.resolved and all the other noise, it's actually just telling me bad request. Now, that might not be necessary, right? I come up here and it says internal server error. So Postman is smart enough to know that, hey, this is what a 500 needs. Maybe they don't need me. Now, I made it a little more Unqork specific, bad request to the module, but maybe I don't need to do that. Maybe applications like Postman, other debugging tools are going to know what an error code means. So you know what? I don't even want to return anything. So I'm going to drop in this special value called blank in the response body value. I'm going to save that. I'll come back over. And I got kicked out. So I'm going to log back in. And now I jump over and I hit request. Oh, no. All right, well, I'm going to continue along. It should have, with blank here, trust me, it works. Blank will blank out the entire response if it doesn't receive, it would basically send back nothing, right? Cool. Couple other things I want to show, though, as we're coming up on the hour, though, is first off, versioning, okay? So I have a module called, I'm going to jump back. Oh, wait. Oh, sorry. It's because I have it on put, and it is a put. So it was a totally successful response. Ha, ha, ha. Things are working. Go back to get over here, execute, and it gave me, oh, that's a 404. Wait, what happened? All right. What happened? API v1. Oh, wait. It's this tab. It's a get. Got it. Okay, cool. I was just on the wrong tab. Let me get rid of this tab. Don't care about it. Here we go. So I did a get and a go. Gave me no body. Okay. So using that blank keyword, and the reason we went with blank here is blank is a commonly used Excel function. So folks oftentimes use that in Excel to check if the value is blank. So we're going to use blank here. So blank will send back a blank response. It'll send back nothing. So I'm going to leave it as blank for now because that works for me, right? So now I get no response back. Quickly, to show you another example where this is super cool. Y'all might, can you see my screen? Hopefully. You can see when I did codeless help, it used to show the data.resolved in here. Not doing it anymore because now we can send back blank responses to Slack or any system that requires very specific responses. You can construct it. You know, we're looking to do a Twitch episode one day integrating with the Twitch API and Twitch API in order to verify that you are the owner of the place that's going to send you notifications about what's going on in your Twitch channel. You have to prove that you're the owner by sending a very specific response code back to Twitch when it executes your API. We could not do that before. We can do that now because we can control every detail of the response body. So it's just going to be another world of integrations that you can do aside from maybe just cleaning up some API responses that you have. All right. But I'm going to switch it back to put, and I just want to show versioning real quick. Okay. So now let's say I came in here and I wanted to add middle name into my full name API. And I'm going to make it a required field, which means if somebody tries to execute this endpoint with middle name required, and they don't send me a middle name, it should fail. Now, I'm just going to double check that maybe my API already, maybe my gateway works that way already. I got to remember how well the gateway is validating my required fields. But I'm going to come down here. I'm going to add middle name. I'm going to make it required. I'll jump back over. And all right, it worked. So I'm not doing full analysis of required. Note to self, do that. Do you remember Mitch? What was that? Norm Macdonald, note to self on was that weekend update. The good old days. But I wouldn't want to do it, right? So let's say I was properly validating the middle name. If I added the middle name to my V1, then anyone who's already interfacing with that endpoint, their API integration is going to break. They're not going to be able to get that full name back because they're not going to know unless I give them a ton of heads up and I make sure that everybody is changed to include the middle name. They're not going to know to do it. And it's going to break. So it's not a good way. So this is a non-backwards compatible change that I want to make to my API. So what is a better way that I can go about doing it? I would want, this is the exact use case that I would want to version my API. So I'll come in here and I'll duplicate this and I will just change this to full name V2. Okay, so now I'm creating a V2 of the same API. I'll come in here. And now in this one, I'm going to add in my middle name. Make it required. I come into my calculator. This would have been a good way to completely break. So, right, this will be a good way to break my required thing, right? So, boom. So now I got FML. Ooh. FML. Never really thought that first, middle, last has another connotation. If anyone is familiar with the FML abbreviation. Ha ha ha. Okay, so this is now my V2, and it's going to calculate first, middle, last. Now, actually, I'm going to just go quickly break this other one. Well, you'll get the idea. So, all right. Well, no, I am going to break it. I'm going to break it. Middle name here. I'm going to go middle name here. Even though I'm not validating, and that's a note, again, note to self to do, I'm going to add it down in here too. I'm going to add middle name in my calculator, and I'm going to make it a required field down there. I'm going to copy this, drop that in there. Now if I save, and now I go back and I execute this V1, I get back no first name, okay? So this was a non-backwards compatible change to my API, and I've now broken my V1 API for everybody who's using my V1. Bad idea, right? So what I would really want to do, let me get rid of that. Let me go back into my calc. I don't want to do that. I don't want to break what's working for my users. So I'll come in and I will just go back and make that first name, last name. Make sure, all right, cool. It's back to good, okay? And now I've got a V2 with the middle name. And now when I come in here, I'll add V2. I'll add in middle name. Now I'll put in Bader. Now I have a brand new V2 endpoint of my full name that is, don't have to worry about backwards compatibility because only people who start using my API at V2 have to worry about the requirement for middle name. All right. Now, this doesn't mean, in many cases, it doesn't mean that you should keep the V1 up forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Eventually, you probably do want to migrate most of your users up to your V2, but this prevents you from having to hold off on innovations until everyone catches up, right? You can go iterate on a V2, V3, V4, however far you want to go, add whatever functionality you want, and the people who use V1, they can take their sweet time getting upgraded to the new features. So then it's more of, hey, don't you want to leverage a really cool feature of V4? You better get off of V1. It changes the conversation to something like that versus you better get to V4 because V1's about to break, right? Or I'm about to break V1 for you. So you can manage these changes a lot more better, continue that pace of innovation really, really high. We're just at 4 o'clock, but let me just go one more quick thing because I did have it on my list of something else I wanted to show, and that was access controls, okay? So I'm going to come in here. That's not the table I want. And I'm going to actually add some access lists. I'm going to deny myself access to my own API. Because again, you want to do this at the firewall if you're blocking entire API IPs or various subsets of IPs against your entire server. But again, if you want to do it on an API basis, doesn't mean you can't do it. So if I go, what is my IP? My IP is this. Okay. So I'm going to jump back over to my API gateway module, and I'm going to drop this into my IP deny list. So it's in my deny, right? I added it. I come back over here and I execute this. No soup for you. You don't get a first name. We've blocked access, right? So you can block access to IPs, again, ranges of IPs if you want. If you want to block a whole swath of them, supporting, just going down here, supporting various different subnets, right? IPv4, 32, 24, boom. Why not? Why not be able to do that, directly inside of your module if you really need to be very specific with your blocking. So clearly, I could go on and on and on about APIs. There's some of my favorite things, whether I'm building an Unqork or in my previous life not building an Unqork. And I hope this was a little bit helpful. One, to talk about the brand new, really cool HTTP response body. Thank you, Rachna, if you're watching. Thank you for getting that out for everyone. It's really, it was a game changer to get this API gateway working. As you really would intend. It's a game changer for being able to integrate with better with systems like Slack, Twitch, and that list is going to continue to grow. And it just might be a way that folks start to adopt more and more in terms of building your APIs, not having to worry about checking this box to set something in the response, being very specific in terms of how you control the response, or as I said, sometimes not even sending any type of body response. So tons of stuff you can do with the new HTTP response body, tons of stuff you can do with your APIs to kind of elevate them from just a single module to an entire gateway or an entire suite of APIs, leveraging and exposing in many different ways a lot of the great features of API development in Unqork. So with that being said, I really could use an IPA. It is only 4 o'clock though, so I'm just going to twiddle my thumbs, probably go back and add in the required validation that clearly I was missing in the request required validation. Go in, add that, and do a lot more awesome uncoding. So thank you all for joining. Thank you anyone who stuck around for an hour and 3 minutes. But it was all worth it because, we should be affiliates soon. And you're going to start seeing our faces a lot more as we do that. So thank you everyone for continuing to join, supporting our efforts here on Twitch, and being very excited to learn more about things like APIs, API gateways, and just the joy of codeless architecture and Unqork. So thanks very much, and we'll catch you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.